Hey listeners, welcome to the Ad Intellect podcast. Today we have with us Komal Shah, who's an educational consultant on a mission to transform the world through conscious education. After Komal spent 5 years in the Teach for America program as a middle school educator, she was left wanting more, which is why she attended the USC Marshall School of Business and received her MBA. Today, she leverages her passion for children to shift outdated educational paradigms and transform the educational system for the betterment of all children. She recently authored a book, Raise Your Hand, which focuses on cultivating consciousness within the modern day education system. In this episode, I talked to Komal about her journey as an educator, the rigidness of the education system, and how can a teacher, parent, or even an elder sibling can create a more conscious learning environment for students. So without further ado, let's jump straight into the show. Hey Komal, welcome to the Ad Intellect podcast. It's indeed a great pleasure to have you on the show.
Hi, Kinshuk. It's nice to meet you as well. I'm so glad we finally connected.
Yes, I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I recently read your book, Raise Your Hand, and it's first of all, it's one of the really good books, very well written books that I've ever read. And I was also in awe of the ideas that you have captured in the book about education, uh, building consciousness into education, and everything else that revolves around it.
Thank you. It always feels good when someone says that because you just never know what's going to resonate with people, right? I feel like when you're a writer, you have an idea for yourself of why you're writing it, but it's been really awesome to hear from people like you know, what worked and what resonated. And so, yeah, I'm excited to talk about it.
Yep, great. Before we dive into the specific topics of the podcast, let's start with the journey first because I think it'll be a good starting point for the conversation. Now, you have definitely explained your journey in detail in the book, but if you can give a short summary so that it really sets the stage for the conversation. Also, at the later part, if you can focus on your MBA. You recently completed your MBA in 2020. So the reason I'm asking this is that I really want to know why after 5 years in education you thought MBA is a good pivot now to take your career ahead.
Yeah. So, I mean, first of all, I'll say I kind of laugh when I see where I am now because I never thought in a million years I'd be here. So, that's been kind of awesome as well. But I always say that, when I stepped into the classroom for the first time, I knew this was it, and I knew education was what I was meant to do. And I know people are always looking for those moments, and I was really lucky that I was able to find that. But that was not what I thought I was going to do. I was a biology major in undergrad, and I thought it was going to be pre-med. Being Indian, there's a lot of conversation about becoming a doctor, and so I thought that that's what I wanted, and I never questioned it. And I definitely would say by the end of college, I was really questioning it and going, is this really what I want to do? And I saw a program called Teach for America where you work in an underserved community for 2 years. And I'm not kidding. I applied to that within an hour, and I had not thought twice about it, had done no research, but I got in. And so that itself changed my life. And I ended up teaching middle school math for 5 years up in a community called Richmond in California. And it was the most transformative experience of my life. I feel that what I thought life was completely shattered, and worked with kids who changed my life and really started to question the education system in a way that I never had before. And answering what you said 5 years, why'd you go to business school? I laughed too. I mean, that's not a natural pathway to take, but I would say that one thing that really resonated with me is the dean of my school actually one time told me, he's like, "Do you know why this school runs so well?" And I was like, "No, why do you think so?" And he's like, "Well, it runs like a business." And that just stayed with me. And I didn't know what that meant. But as someone who thought maybe one day I would start my own school, I was like, that's really interesting. I don't know anything about business. I was a bio major. So my fifth year, I was struggling to be in the classroom and I said, you know what? I'm just going to try to apply and see what happens. And that's really what happened. In a couple months, I applied and got in, and that itself was a great experience because I think a lot of times in education, we're missing the business perspective. And the reality is, our whole economy is based on these kind of ideologies and strategies. And so I was able to be in at school getting my MBA, but I was thinking about everything through education and trying to understand where were we going wrong. And it was a very, very pivotal experience, and I'm very grateful for it. So yeah, that's kind of where my journey ended in 2020. Started my own business, became an author, and here we are.
Wow, that's great. That's a very profound story. So, Teach for America, um, then you became a teacher, then business school. So, what are you currently focusing now when it comes to education? Are you still teaching, or are you more of like an education consultant now?
I would definitely say I'm more of a consultant. I'm still doing a lot of work around my book and, kind of working to keep launching it with different editions.
Mhm.
But, as a consultant, absolutely. I mean, ideally, I would love to work with teachers and parents about the educational system and ultimately schools on how we can kind of reform it and shift it. But that definitely takes time. And so I'm kind of just taking it step by step. And then I'm actually also doing workshops at conferences, education conferences, and kind of starting to implement some of these strategies and just questioning kind of what we've been doing for so long, and trying to shift mindsets basically. So, kind of have my foot in different places right now and trying to figure out what sticks.
Great, great. Cool. So let's focus around the book. A couple of things which I really noticed while I was reading it was one, it had a very strong opening, which I wasn't
Mm,
expecting. Although the story was like, really sad and heart wrenching, but I think it instilled in my mind that what I'm about to read is really important. So that was one thing, and the other thing was that the amount of thought that you've put in narrating your experiences while teaching.
mm,
Um, I think it's very difficult to do, and I think you were yourself very conscious while teaching that you could absorb all these experiences of the students and could share that, uh, in a way that it really engages the reader about, why is this important and why, you are stressing so much about consciousness and empathy and other feelings, right? So that was really great, which, I could take away from the book. um, the third one was that it really brought me back to my school days. So whenever you
mm,
were narrating an experience, I was in the back of my mind, trying to assess that, did something similar happen with me? Did any
mm.
variation of that happen with me? How did I react and how did I learn from it? So I think it was a good nostalgia to, go through your journey and your students' journey. One question, Komal, which has really bugged me in the past, and it was constantly there at the back of my mind while I was reading the book, and when I was, preparing for this podcast, so I had to ask you this. Um, if you see in the last 10, 15 years, almost every industry, be it, finance, banking, healthcare, manufacturing, every industry has gone through cycles of innovation and improvement, to keep up with where we are now, right? But if you see education as an industry, the curriculum, the subjects that we still teach and learn, everything is almost the same, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, Definitely in the last couple of years, probably due to the pandemic, a lot of technology penetration has been seen in the education with edtech and stuff like that. But if you take a macro level of with the way learning happens and way that things are taught within a school environment is more or less the same.
Mm-hmm.
So my question was that why education or schooling as an industry is so rigid and change averse, and from your vantage point, have you seen in these last 5 years some
Mm-hmm.
radical changes or innovations that are happening to transform the education system?
Yeah. Well, you just asked $1 million question. Because we're all wondering, why is the industry not changing? And I think it's a multifaceted answer. I don't think there's just one. And here are the few takes that I can answer. The first is the purpose of what the system was built for, it still works. And I think we need to acknowledge that. So the way the system works for what it was built for, and what it was built for is to make really good workers and to get kids in this day and age to and through college. It works, and I'm not shining a light on the socioeconomic differences, because there are differences with those who are growing up in schools that maybe are under resourced and maybe are not allowing them to get to college. But on a macro level, most schools are able to reach that goal. So to have grades and test scores and teach a lesson from the front, I mean, in many ways, it's worked, because we are seeing the results of people going to college. And so we know that in some respect, it is working for what it was built for. Now, if you think also, education is, it's very interesting because it's very legacy based, and it is very ingrained for people as this is just something you do. It's a checklist. When I was growing up, I was never really given an option. It was just you go to school, you do well, because this is what's going to set you up for success. There was no room to question it. And my parents said, I had to do it, you have to do it too. So that's all they know. And so it gets perpetuated generation over generation because no one is really questioning it. And as we know in business and in industries, the reason things change is because the demand changes, right? That's why the product changes. That's why you start new services, because your clients are saying, you're not serving my needs. But in education, who are our clients? They're our kids. And you could also argue parents, because parents usually are making the choices for the kids. But ultimately, the clients are your kids. And we have an interesting dynamic in our society that we don't always give voice and choice to children. We kind of say, we know what's best. And so what happens is, even if kids are saying things like, I hate school, I am stressed out, I have so much homework today, we're not really listening. We're kind of saying, well, that's what I had to do, so you got to do it too. So we've kind of allowed it to go on. And we can sit here and talk about the political system and the bureaucratics. And, the reality is, on an individual level, we struggle to change, right? In our personal lives, we struggle to change all the time. So, from a system level, imagine all these people who don't really want to change. And now, systematically, of course, things are not going to change unless there's something drastic that's happening. Would it change maybe if there are 100 to 200 parents outside of a school demanding something different for their kids? Yeah, things would probably change. But is that happening? That's the question. And so it's been interesting because those are some of the things that I've taken away of why we're not changing a system. Now, if you were to ask me in the past 5 years, I would kind of narrow in on since the pandemic started, so 2 years in general, there has been innovation that's happened. And I think the biggest thing, of course, is remote learning. Teachers have had to adapt to a different way of teaching. Schools have had to adapt very differently on kids' needs of what it feels like to adapt at home. So there has been innovation in that way. Now, if you were to ask me, have the public school systems changed the way that they actually, to your point, on a macro level, are really shifting the way that they do things? Honestly, probably not. But what I have seen is that people are now changing on more of a secular level. And so you see a lot of like micro schools coming out. You're seeing parents who are having pairing up with their neighbors and they're having 5 kids in the backyard and having a teacher come in and teach them lessons that way. That's something that's been happening since the pandemic. There are a lot of schools out there that are super innovative, that they do care about the learning. They do care about community. They are really having the teachers like Montessori, where it's the teachers on the side and really guiding the child, and they're not imposing anything on them. Those philosophies are out there. But on an institutional level that we're seeing in most countries, that's not happening, right? You hear a lot alternative schools or, homeschooling. You're hearing these other things that are happening and pockets of it. But the question is it happening in the day to day general classrooms? And I think the answer would probably be no, it's not really happening.
Yeah. I think it's a very interesting point. And like remembering from my school days, right? I think what you said is that because uh, they like the demands of parents and the kids never really changed, that never really fueled that innovation streak, right, within the education system. And I think what's radically different from other industries is that usually in a school environment, like generally like a difference of opinion is usually suppressed. If somebody is saying, questioning, why should I study this and why can't we have it this way, it's usually suppressed, as opposite to any other industry where a difference of opinion is usually celebrated, right?
Mm,
If you see technology as an industry, somebody who thinks different is really celebrated there, but in a classroom environment, I'm not sure if we are creating that sort of environment. So I think it makes a lot of sense, that a few micro changes definitely we are noticing, but on the macro level, it's still the same. um, another kind of anecdote which I really remember is that, whenever like when I was in school, right, it was at that
mm-hmm,
intersection point where technology within education was just being introduced. So
mm.
we're having these smart classes and stuff like that. um what it really did was that, now like students had a different way to comprehend stuff. It was not
Yeah.
just a teacher teaching one subject a specific way, but the students have had a different way to comprehend what's being taught, and they had a different way to explore the teaching. So I think that was probably the turning point where technology started really making a difference. But I think overall, if if the way the education is being delivered doesn't change, it won't really make that much of a difference. And if
Mm-hmm.
thought process of educators is still same, probably then also it won't really make a difference, right? uh, Overall.
And the reality is that educators don't always have a lot of choice in the matter.
Mhm.
Curriculum is usually imposed by the state, and test scores is how teachers are usually evaluated of their kids. And then you also have time constraints. As we know, learning, first of all, learning is happening for every human every day. We
Yeah.
are learners naturally. It's not confined to a classroom. Now, if we talk about learning within the classroom, we do have to start asking ourselves, if I am teaching a lesson every single day because I need to make sure that we get all of this covered before the test and the state test, then we really have to ask ourselves, can we fully understand each concept in just a day, in just 40 minutes? And the reality is most of us don't. I mean, think about just life. I mean, we encounter the same lessons over and over again until we're able to fully understand it, right?
Yeah.
And so it's the same thing with education. I mean, to sit here and say, oh, they didn't understand this after 40 minutes, I think we really need to ask ourselves, well, should they? Like,
Yeah.
should they really comprehend how to do this theory? Because, and I think teachers do get frustrated. They see their kids losing out, being called they're not keeping up, they're not smart enough. And they know that they are. It's just the way the system is built. It really shines the light on the people who are good at memorization and
Yeah.
who are fast at adapting and integrating, and also many who are very good at getting A's.
Yeah.
They're good at it. And I think we really have to ask ourselves, A, is that really learning? And B, what are we actually looking for? Because
Definitely.
we know that the most critical thinkers are not always the fast ones. They're the ones that's spending a month on a project to really fully get it, you know?
Yeah.
And so when we start asking those questions, we're like, oh, wait, maybe that is not how it should be. But, I will say, I never questioned it. I never questioned it until I became a teacher. And so I always put that out there that as a society, we don't really reflect on our education because it's such a check mark on our resume.
Yeah. And I think because we're going with the flow so much that, as you said, are these 40 minutes enough to understand this concept? Um, Probably it's not for everyone, right? Someone can understand it in 40 minutes. Somebody can understand in 4 hours. Some might take 4 weeks to understand the same thing. So I
Mhm.
think because we are delivering education in a way that one size fits all, kinds of gets messy at some point of time, and then everybody else has to adapt to that pace, which is quite
Mhm.
difficult for the students. um, we'll take a slight tangent from this conversation, and I had some very like fun lighthearted questions reserved for this talk. So let's treat this as a rapid fire round. We'll keep the answers short and sweet.
Okay.
um, yeah. So while preparing for the podcast, I read that you grew up in San Diego, California, and you have been very active with the Indian community out there. So I had
Mhm.
some questions around that.
Okay.
Um, yeah. So the first question is, what is one Indian dish that you cannot live without?
Oh, oh my gosh, that's so hard. Okay, pav bhaji.
Wow, that's great. That's absolutely delicious. Um, your favorite Bollywood movie slash actor, if you are into
Uh,
Bollywood.
been a long time since I've watched a movie, but I would say Rani Mukherjee and Shah Rukh Khan.
Wow, that's great. So you really haven't watched the latest movies now?
No, so I don't know any of these new
Yeah.
people.
Okay. No, that's great. What is your Diwali tradition? Do you do like something special every year, or how is it like in San Diego?
We decorate the house and my whole family. So I have a brother. So it's my mom, dad, me, and my brother. So we do pujas usually for the first 2 days. And I will say when I was growing up, wasn't always bought into it. But
Hmm.
as I've gotten older, I find that tradition to be one of my favorite holidays. And so yeah, that's what we do every
Wow,
year.
great, great. Um, so this brings me to the next question. Which book are you currently reading? And the book that you have recommended the most. Now, this is apart from your own book.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a good clarification. I have a couple books because I go to the library all the time. So what I'm reading right now, I picked up Atomic Habits and a fiction novel called Clara and the Sun. So we'll see how those two go. What I've recently read are two different ones that I highly recommend. The first one is called Radical Awakening. It's by Dr. Shafali Saberi. She's a very prominent psychologist and works with conscious parenting. And this book is a lot about how to take control of your own suffering and heal it instead of blaming other people. So it's very radical and very difficult to read. And then the next one was Think Again by Adam Grant that I just read. And it was phenomenal because it talks a lot about unlearning, which is a lot about what I talk in my book.
Wow. It is one of the books on my background. I just got it for reading this year, so I hope that that goes well. So thanks for the
Yes, highly
recommendations.
recommend. So good.
Great, great. The last question for the rapid fire round is, when you're not teaching, consulting, reading, writing, where can one find you? Like, how do you spend your leisure time?
Oh, okay. If I'm inside the house, I'm either reading or doing a puzzle, and they have to be at least 1,000 pieces. If I'm
Okay,
out and about, I would be dancing or, sitting in a park and reading, probably, or spending time with family and friends. But yeah, kind of all over the
great.
place.
So you read a lot,
Yes,
technically.
I do. Yeah.
No, that's great. That's great. Cool. So now let's bring our focus back to the topic. Um, Probably the most important question. I really thought a lot about how to frame this, and I'd say it took me a couple of days and a couple of pages to reread from your book, but I was able to formulate that. So one phrase which really stood out from the whole book was, probably, it goes something like this: like, instill education with consciousness and emotional learning. I think that's where you have put a lot of emphasis in your book.
Hmm.
And what I could understand was that, at some point, while chasing grades, scores, assignments, and deadlines, we forgot, what the primary motive of education was. And it was probably to make sure that the child, when exiting the school, is a better version of themselves,
Hmm.
not only intellectually, but emotionally as well.
Hmm.
Um, I really love the notion that you stated in the book, that over the years we have become, really good at measuring intellectual intelligence, that is IQ, but we have failed at measuring emotional intelligence. Like, how good have we been emotionally, and how much have we grown uh, to handle emotions? Um, I would like to quote a few words here, which I personally felt were really profound, from the book. And they go something like this: millions of children's lives have the potential to shift if schools don't focus solely on academic learning, but the entire being. I think these are one of the best lines from the book. And the question I want to ask you here is that, from an educator's point of view, what changes or strategies do you suggest that educators, schools, even parents, put into practice, so that we can bring back that humane aspect to education? And
Hmm.
do you think it requires like a whole system overhaul, or a single educator or parent can, initiate that change within the classroom itself?
Hmm. So, absolutely can happen within the classroom. I don't want to negate the power that a teacher or anyone has, because I saw the shifts in my classroom. By the fifth year of teaching, I taught math, which is a subject that a lot of students struggle with or have strong feelings against. They either love it
Yeah.
or they hate it. And I was the teacher who really wanted to show them that, I was there for them as a human being. And I had a big bulletin board in my classroom that said, "How are you feeling today?" And it was really about emotional stability. And I integrated meditation into my classroom before we would start every lesson. And I always wanted to show them, I am not here to just see what you do on this test. I'm here because I want to guide you as a human. And that's ultimately why I'm here. And so it can happen in the classroom. And I will say something, it happens in a lot of classrooms. I think a lot of teachers do a phenomenal job of building relationships with their students. They have morning meetings and they have circles, and they really try to integrate some of this type of work in there. Now, on a systemic level, we are seeing more and more curriculum coming in for SEL, which is socio emotional learning or mindfulness. Now, here's the caveat though, a lot of this is happening supplemental, it's happening in addition to what's already being done. And whenever you put something as in addition to, it does not become a priority. When it is not integrated into the culture of the school, it is not a priority. So, to give an example, a workplace where they work the workers for 12 to 15 hours per day. And then they say, hey, on Friday, you're going to have a yoga class in the morning. That's great. But is that really supporting and shifting the culture of that workplace? No, they're still working very late hours and are tired and burnt out. And so, similarly, we're seeing that in schools. A lot of time it's added on, but it's not actually supporting the culture of the school. So, in my opinion, the whole system needs to shift their outlook of what it really means to educate a child. And as we know over and over again, our emotions are important. And, the reason why they're important is because we need to learn how to navigate them. We need to understand, hey, when I'm feeling this way, what does that mean? What are the tools I have to kind of work through that? Not, oh, okay, I feel this way, but I'm just going to suppress it because I don't really know what to work around with this, right? And so I think there are few schools out there that are doing this. It is part of their vision, it's part of what they do. But I truly believe it's something that needs to happen all over. And one argument I will make is I say, systems are made up of people. If we wanted to change, people have to change. And I really stand by that because I think it does take a change for educators and parents and school leaders who truly believe that education is just about the academic learning,
Yeah.
and when you have thought that for centuries, how do you say, go, oh, maybe that education is actually about cultivating the entire being? And
Yeah.
of course, then that's hard because if you've never experienced that, you're going, well, I turned out fine. So, like, why do we need to do that? So, it takes a lot of unlearning to really think about and go, what we're doing is working, but is it actually supporting the child? And if we're seeing a mental health crisis in adults, like, what can we do in education to kind of negate some of the things we see as they get older? Right. And so, I will stand by that always. But I do think it takes a lot of shifting of mindset to get to that place.
Yep. That's a great answer. Something I could relate to. The example of the yoga lesson that you gave, I think it was same when I was in school. So we would have like one yoga class for 30-45 minutes every week or
Mhm.
every 2 weeks, which you know which just 50% of the students could make. To other 50% would, just wander off because they didn't want to do yoga. So imagine having, a yoga class having like once or twice a month, and then expecting students to do yoga really well and to instill that into their daily schedules. It was just not possible, right? um other thing when I was reading the book and I came to realize was that almost all our subjects are revolved around like studies and grades and doing well academically. But
Yeah.
we probably should have some subjects as well where which really help practically into like in living a better life. So why not be teaching children mindfulness, or how to meditate, or even cooking, right? It's an essential skill to survive. I think definitely, probably the mindset change that you're talking about is really important. Um, One question that uh, I wanted to ask you is like when you were teaching 1 or 2 years back, what was if you see a particular student is not doing emotionally. I think there are some anecdotes in the book as well, but if you can just double down on this. If some student is not doing emotionally well emotionally, how would you um, focus on that student particularly so that they can at least feel a bit better?
Um, I mean, I do the best I can with the time I had. That's just the reality.
Mm.
And that breaks my heart. But when you have 30 kids in your classroom and you have a few kids that have needs, it's tough. So I would say two ways that I did it. The first is I had really strong relationships with my students. I was, I'm a very relationship oriented teacher. I really wanted to get to know them. And so immediately when a kid would come in and they were struggling, I knew because I had a relationship with them. So it would either be, a little small check in, or maybe I would talk to them after class, or I would say, hey, what's going on? And maybe I'm like, I'm here if you want to share with me what's happening. So it's the little things, right? It's the, hey, wait here for a second, or "Hey, like, can I talk to you outside for a second?" It was those moments where I was able to check in. If it was something that I thought was a big issue, then obviously I'd go to the counselor and say, you need to talk to the student. So it just depended. Now, a lot of my students suffered a lot of trauma because of their circumstances. And so it was happening more often than not, to be honest. And I also had to protect my own mental health.
Yeah,
So it was a balancing act of trying to be there for them as much as I could by also trying to keep the ball rolling. And that's, I think, was really difficult for me, but I also know in that moment was necessary. So I would say that's a part of it. But, I do struggle with the fact that kids feel that when they feel this way, that they're somehow different,
yeah,
because the reality is we're all going through something.
yeah,
But it's who's hiding it and who's showing it. I mean, that's really the only difference. And so I always wanted my classroom to be a place where everyone felt that they could maybe do
yeah,
something and say it, instead of it being like, hey, let me talk to you on the side, when that kid now feels isolated and feels like they're weird that they feel this way, which is not the truth. um so that's kind of the way I did it. I will also just add that I had really shifted the way I taught in my classroom. So by my fifth year of teaching, I had a lot of time myself. The kids kind of ran the classroom, and they were kind of taking ownership of their own learning. And when you do that, I mean, the teacher has a lot of time.
yeah,
And so those were the times that I could really focus on individual kids and, take those moments to really support kids who need my help, versus me being in the front. Because if you're going to be in the front, the reality is you won't be able to support their emotional needs. It's very difficult.
yeah. I can understand that. And this brings us to the last question. What piece of advice would you like to give as an like with your experience to an educator, parent, or even a sibling who has probably their younger brother or sister in school, and they're not happy with the way the schooling is going, and they think that it might need an update, something they can imbibe in their whole in their own uh, teaching environment, which can actually, I won't say bring the change completely, but initiate the change of consciousness. And I would also, one story which really touched me was that, which you just told, right, that you, I mean, it was not very easy for you to help everybody who's going through a tough time at school, and
Hmm.
you also took support of yoga and meditation
Hmm.
in a way to balance yourself so that you can give out the best to the students. So if you can just touch base on that as well, that experience as well, I think that'll be great.
Yeah, I mean, the advice I would give to anyone right away is say, every child has a gift, everyone. And so if they are not doing well in school, I think it's time to really reevaluate, is it the kid or is it the system? Because those are two very different things. And really trying to understand, if the kid is creative, I mean, use it, cultivate it, make it known that that's okay. I think a lot of times we say, well, that's not important, or you still need to do well in math and science. Like, that's not how you're going to be successful. And I really hope that we can start breaking out of those ideas. And I know a lot of parents who are, and I'm very proud of them for doing that. And I think that's super important. So, as a parent, I think it's really sitting down and asking yourself, what do I want for my child? What do I want for them? Okay. What does success look like for me, for my child? What does success look like where I'll know my child feels successful? What will that look like? What will that feel like? And really focus on that, because society, your neighbors, the world is going to pressure you that your child needs to be a certain way. But I hope that we can really ask ourselves what it means to truly be successful, because it can look very different than how we've said it. So that's for from the parent perspective. For the teacher, I would say, is there a way then you can make it more about the kids in your classroom? Is there a way? And there's always a way. Um, is there a way that you can sit in the back more? Is there a way where you don't have to have your voice be the biggest voice in the room for the entire time they're there? Is there a way that they can be excited about their learning? Because when they're seen and they're heard, that's actually when we're cultivating more of the entire being, right? If you're having your kids, students come in and sit in a rows and listen to you and take down notes, it is not learning. And I will say that over and over again. That is not learning. So we need to stop that. And I think as an educator, it's really important to ask yourself, how can I reframe the power dynamic in this classroom? That was the first thing I would say. Yeah. And in terms of just yoga and meditation, I was always really big on not doing it in my classroom until I integrated it into my own life. And that's something I will always practice what I preach. So once I was integrating it and I was seeing, it was just shifting things in my classroom. I mean, I would come into class and kids would say, Miss Shah, you're just more calm now. You're not yelling, or you're not irritated or annoyed. And I was like, yeah, because I do this practice in my own life and I just feel more present with you all and I'm more here for you all. And after I started doing that, I said, okay, well, I think I'm ready to now teach this and share it. And so I would invite it. I wouldn't impose it. I would invite it with my kids. I would tell them, we're going to take a moment of silence. And if you feel uncomfortable, you can put your head down, you can keep it up. I really wanted to make it welcoming. And it's so funny because I visit my students, every year after I've left the classroom, and, they'll always be like, Miss Shah, breathe, and I'm like, okay, I think I instilled something in them because now they understand the power of the breath. But, I think it's so crucial and critical. However, if we haven't done it in our own lives, it's hard for us to see the importance and significance of it. It's just the reality. And so that's just something to keep in mind, though. I would wish upon everyone to be able to share that with children, but you just, it may not be for everyone.
Wow, that's great. One last question before we wrap up. I really wanted to ask you, because the audience of this podcast is very young, so we have a
Mm.
lot of young listeners. If somebody uh, is very early in their careers, or probably uh, just started out their career and is thinking of pivoting into teaching, not only high school but probably university as well, uh, what advice, or what sort of why should they do that, according to you, like from your experience?
Mm. You know, I would just say, whenever in life you feel called to something, you have to take the risk and do it. And when we take risks in life and do things that maybe our parents or our families or people in society don't understand, the one thing I will always tell young people is do it anyways,
Yeah.
because your own fulfillment ultimately is your truth, and that's your happiness, and you are not here to fulfill other people's needs. You're here to fulfill your own. I will say that the reality of teaching is you're not financially compensated as you would be in other things. So be smart, figure out, okay, if I do this, then how will I support myself in other ways? But if you feel called to guide children, you really believe in work in building relationships, you thrive on that. And maybe you feel that you were in a schooling system that didn't support you, but now you want to give that change to children and the new generation, then I would say go make that happen, because those 5 years were the hardest years of my life, but they were also the best years of my life. And so it's going to be both.
Great, great. I think it's very profound. I personally have this goal to at some stage in my career probably pivot to teaching in
Hmm.
any way which I can, full time, part time, because I think teaching is probably one of the best ways to give back to society
Mm,
what society has given you, probably. So um,
yeah.
I think that'll be great. So I think it's a good point to end the conversation. Thanks for your time, Komal. It was really a pleasure to talk to you. Um, and again, congratulations on your book. I wish you best of luck and more success ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I will just tell your listeners that I'm on LinkedIn, and so feel free to connect. And if you have questions or follow-up questions, I'm always happy to engage and start that conversation.
Perfect. Yeah. The link to your book and also your LinkedIn would be in the show notes below so that audience can access it really easily.
Amazing.
All right. Great. Hey, listeners, thank you for tuning in to Ad Intellect. The contact details of the guests and any additional relevant links are available in the show notes below. We'd love to hear what you think about the podcast, so please write to us on atintellect@gmail.com. Until next time, peace.